Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Joint Legislative Management Committee on Thursday, March 24th. So during this meeting, we are about to receive a presentation from the National Council of State Legislatures recommending a pay structure for legislative employees. We will discuss later on our plans for implementing the proposed structure, and then whether to hold a vote to adopt it or not. As just a reminder and for some context, this committee asked for the report last session after receiving several compensation related questions and requests. And it was clear to us that we should have a more uniform approach with clear, consistent criteria, and make sure that we had a comprehensive plan across all departments and across the branch. So what is being recommended to us today is a pay structure that groups similar positions across the branch. This is the first step in developing a more comprehensive compensation policy, but it will also help ensure that we have a solid baseline from where we are starting. So with that, it's been great to work with NCSL, and I'm excited and happy to turn it over to the NCSL team to walk us through the report. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for having us here with you today, or virtually with you. Sorry, we couldn't be there in person. And I'm Natalie Wood. I'll start there. That's my name, and I direct NCSL Center for Legislative Strengthening. The shorthand I give to my parents about what it is I do for a living is that I guide a team that provides expertise in how legislatures work, who works within them, and how they function as workplaces. And as a result, projects such as this one fall within my purview, and I've done quite a bit of work with legislatures across the country on various projects that look at their organizational management and how they function and run as an institution. So I'll stop there and let my colleague Selena introduce herself.
Hello, good afternoon. Selena Salcedo. I am part of the Center for Legislative Strengthening with Natalie at NCSL. I've been a policy specialist for about 3.5 years at NCSL. I cover human resources in state legislatures as one of my policy areas, including classification and compensation. So I've been on many projects similar to this one in nature with this team. And I'll turn it over to Victor.
Thank you, Selena. Good afternoon. My name is Victor Villalpando Nunez, and I am another member of Natalie's team. I've been doing this work for a few years for NCSL. In addition to being a member of the team, I am also the Chief Operating Officer for NCSL.
And Madam Chair, you couldn't have said it better. And what we tried to do for you over the past 6 or 7 months is create a baseline, a structure for you to use moving forward, to strengthen the institution, to strengthen your legislative staffing operation. So thank you for that great introduction. I also want to say, in addition to thanking you for the opportunity to be here today, I want to thank you for the opportunity you gave us to learn more about and work with your legislature. A cornerstone of NCSL's mission is to advance the effectiveness, integrity, and independence of the legislative branch. And we believe studies like this one, where we're helping legislatures evolve their operations, help us fulfill that mission. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the staff. This research, this study would not have been possible without a lot of hard work and time and input from the staff in the Vermont General Assembly. And one asset that we provide to any legislature that works with us on a project like this is that we know that staff, we know a lot about legislatures across the country, and we know that they're all different. And we also know that the staff and the folks who serve within them are the experts on their own institutions. And so you'll see throughout the course of our remarks today, we really value staff input, and that was a cornerstone of the work that we did. I also want to commend you. It's not easy or always riveting to focus on personnel management issues, or at the very least, it might not be the #1 reason that you ran for office. But as I hope that we're going to impress upon you today, NCSL believes that creating a more consistent, uniform, and transparent approach to staff pay will serve your institution well. Today, I'm going to lead you through a discussion about a little bit of background in the scope of our study, some high points on compensation analysis principles. We're going to talk to you about the methodology that we used for this project, and then we'll move toward our analysis and recommendations. By way of background, as we mentioned, we as a team have experience and expertise in working with other legislatures on projects such as this one. NCSL has been around for almost 50 years, and we've worked with legislatures for decades on different institutional research projects and studies, including many on staff classification and compensation. They're all different, but we all have a very standard approach to doing the work that served us well over that time. In some legislatures, we partnered with them more than once, and that's the case for the Vermont General Assembly as well. You commissioned a study in 2018. We had colleagues, some of whom are here and some who aren't anymore, who worked on that project. None of us were staffing that project, but one of the recommendations that came out of that work was that the legislature create a unified staff compensation plan. And that, I believe, undergirded the ask to us last year to come in and do a second phase 2 study. So if Victor, you could advance to the next slide. This outlines the scope of work in the proposal that was accepted by you all. NCSL was to first create a job classification structure for the General Assembly for all of the titles in your legislature. And when we talk about classification today, what that really means is it's a way to place staff titles in clusters. So it's kind of creating a system where you have titles from different offices that sort of line up with each other. And Victor's going to talk to you about how we got that alignment to happen. But classification grade is another term we might use interchangeably to talk about that. Second, we were to examine and compare current staff compensation for each job title, and there's 61 at last count in the General Assembly. We're comparing that to the relevant job market, trying to assess how competitive you are with the market in which you compete for talent when it comes to employment. Third, we were to create salary ranges that correspond to that classification structure. And fourth, make recommendations related to those study objectives. Just a little bit about the benefits for creating a compensation structure. Again, you heard a little bit about some of the common terms we're going to use throughout the course of these remarks and what the chair said at the beginning. It gives consistency, it gives transparency, and it provides uniformity to an organization. And there are benefits for different players and for the institution, as this slide shows. Some of the benefits for staff is it helps staff clarify goals and expectations. It helps them see a roadmap for their position, where they might be able to go when it comes to pay if you have a plan in place. And it creates some consistency for people who have the same title and for people who have other titles as well. There are benefits for managers. It gives you a roadmap and guidance in helping figure out pay. If you need to recruit somebody, it helps provide you with some guardrails or parameters around what you should be offering potential employees or job candidates. And it also can help your current folks with respect to advancement, performance, and training opportunities. And third, and importantly, it benefits the institution. It aids in recruitment and retention. It provides you with legal protections by providing that consistency. You as an institution are able to provide a rationale behind why decisions about pay are being made because you've adopted a structure. And it also means that you'll be a stronger market competitor if you have data and information behind your decisions around pay, ideally because you've looked at the market and you're able to figure out your posture to the market. I'm next going to touch on a little bit about philosophy and principles in compensation plan design. I said earlier, all legislatures are different. That's very true. And everyone is in a different place in their evolution and creating pay structures, but many have them, and many public and private sector organizations have them too. They differ in the details, but many share a focus on three main things, and they're outlined here before you. One is a consistent structure. Two is internal equity. So the plan is focused on creating equity between different jobs in the organization and between offices in the organization as well. And third, a focus on external competitiveness or the job market, as we've been mentioning. There's also some philosophy with respect to an employer's posture to the market. So there's legitimate strategies that you can use. You can decide you're going to meet the market. We're going to talk to you about what we found in the job market for titles that we consider relevant and like titles in the General Assembly, and you can decide to match that pay. An employer might also choose to lead the market for different reasons. Maybe they're in an industry where there's a lot of competition for talent and they find that strategy is beneficial to them, and they might have the budget to do it too. Or third, you might choose to lag the market. And there, again, budget might be a reason for doing that. You might be able to offer non-monetary rewards that give you an advantage that isn't just about salary. And so once the pay plan is adopted, it is important for an organization to think about the philosophy and your tolerance for turnover, what budget's available to you. It's all going to determine your posture, quote unquote, to the market. If you've read our report, there's descriptions and definitions about some of the terms that you'll see over and over again. And the slide has a lot going on, but really what we wanted you to take away from it is there are some key elements and terms when it comes to designing a plan. They get to the mathematical logic that you need to employ when creating a structure. So you're going to see us mention in our report and in our remarks today, salary range, minimum, midpoint, and maximum. I'll touch on that again in a second. You're going to see us talking about range width. The salary range is, those data points that show you the minimum of it, the maximum of it, and the width of that range. We're going to talk about midpoint progression, and we're also going to, throughout the comments today from NCSL, we'll talk about how creating a structure means you really have to focus on the positions in your organization and what you need out of those positions, not the employee. While we care deeply about legislative staff, they are members of NCSL, much like legislators are. With this kind of work, focusing on the employee is not what we were there to do. We were not focused on individual pay or anything about performance with employees. We're simply looking at the positions in the legislature. Next slide, please. This slide gives you some definitions of those terms that I just mentioned, and the numbers before you are actually taken from a real live legislative institution. So this is an excerpt from one institution's pay plan. And you'll see actually over to the left, it says range, it really is grade. So there's different grades or classifications in this legislature's plan. And then there's a salary range. Minimum and maximum are sort of those guardrails. What's the base level pay for the titles that fall into the range, and what's the most that the organization is going to pay titles in those ranges. The midpoint is the average of those two. And it also becomes an important building block for folks like us in creating a plan, because you're going to base some of that mathematical logic and those formulas that you create off of the midpoint. This also shows you, the grade width used in this plan, which is 95%. So you're looking at it's sort of a percentage about the minimum to the maximum. And then the progression refers to the percent by which the midpoint goes up throughout the course of the plan. So we just wanted to give you an example that you could refer back to when we're talking about all of these terms. I think that's all I want to say. Next, turn over to Selena, and she's going to talk to you about our methodology.
Every legislative staffing environment is different. NCSL's methodology follows a typical pattern. Our approach is informed by several national organizations, including the Society for Human Resource Management, the Economic Research Institute, the Federal Office of Personnel and Management, and the Employers Council. And NCSL staff maintains ongoing training and current compensation analysis best practices. The key practices of NCSL's methodology are a three-pronged analysis that were used for this project. First, understanding the job content of each title. Second, conducting point factor analysis on each distinct job title in collaboration with the directors, and Victor will cover this shortly, and conducting market analysis for all titles in the plan using market data collection. So understanding job content. NCSL conducted a job content analysis to develop a clear understanding of each of the roles and responsibilities for each title, and we relied heavily on staff input in this process. We started with meeting with staff directors and chiefs of staff to discuss the project and explain NCSL's goals and objective. We reviewed all existing job descriptions, and thank you to the HR team and the directors for gathering these all for this project. We want to understand the work environment and understand the job, and a key part is separating the person from the job. We then deployed a job content questionnaire to all Assembly employees. We sent out a total of 94, and NCSL received 70 completed questionnaires and 51 supervisor forms, and we were pleased with the response rate. The questionnaire asked staff to provide various details about their position and their work, including the percentage of time they spend on certain tasks or responsibilities, and their opinions on the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required to do their job. The questionnaire responses provided crucial insight into these Assembly roles. We then held virtual interviews with a representative sample of staff via Zoom and Teams. And in total, we conducted 53 individual staff interviews. So we used multiple sources of data that help us get a base knowledge of the content of each position. And now I'll turn it over to Victor.
Thank you very much, Selena. So I am going to talk about point factor analysis. So in a very broad scope, point factor analysis is a systematic method of determining groups of distinct job titles within an organization. As Selena mentioned, NCSL met with a team of key senior level stakeholders from the Vermont General Assembly that were very knowledgeable and familiar with each of the titles. And those individuals were all the directors across the organization. Over a series of 4 days in mid-December, we point factored 61 job titles. And you can see that list if you refer to Appendix A of the report. The tool that we use to assess each title is based on a model created by the U.S. Office of Personnel Management and has been modified by NCSL to accommodate for the unique needs of state legislatures. As Natalie mentioned earlier, we've been doing this for over a decade and have done this for a number of legislatures across the country. So we've taken all of that knowledge of understanding the uniqueness of those titles and applied that to the tool. The tool itself includes 9 scoring charts and a total of 133 distinct scoring options. Categories include such factors as knowledge, experience, education, independence of action, consequence of error, and level of supervision, just to name a few. We used a process of consensus-based decision-making that applied to all factors outlined in our PFA tool for each title, and we used a blind scoring process. We opted to use a blind scoring process to improve objectivity and limit bias within the process. The blind scores are a proxy for an actual number or score value that we use to group each of the titles together. We, NCSL, served as facilitators of the conversations and helped direct the conversation as needed, but we really relied on the expertise of the directors and the key stakeholders. However, we did serve as the final arbiters of the job scores. I'll give you a little bit of overview of the process. Following the great fun 4 days that we gathered, we took all of that data and converted the scores to an actual number value. Reviewed job descriptions, reporting lines within the organization, internal career paths, and the titles, and ultimately created the cluster of job titles that you see in Appendix A. In all, we created 12 grades. You'll notice that there are grades 1 through 14 in the actual proposal. Grades 1 and 14 are both empty, which allows for growth at both ends of the pay structure. And I'll close with a few things to consider. You've noticed that we've used this as a theme throughout our presentation and as a theme throughout our research and our project. The project and the process focused on the job title and not the person. We recognize this may be hard to separate out the person from the title, but this is a key tenet of the work and a really important part of the process. The PFA scores are specific to the Vermont General Assembly and the 61 unique titles that you all have within the organization. And the final PFA scores are not a reflection of the employee's value or importance within the organization, but merely an output of the tool we use to group the titles together. So now I will turn it over to Selena, who will review our market data collection process.
So our next step in our methodology is market data collection. We compared legislative jobs to similar jobs in the market, identified matches, and added pay range data to analyze. And we wanted to make sure we were comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges. So the sources that we used included state, executive, and judicial branches, the cities of Burlington and Montpelier, the University of Vermont, and other legislatures, including Maine, New Jersey, New Mexico, North Carolina, and Utah. And those were all adjusted geographically for the cost of labor in the market. So for each job in another legislature or in another city outside of Montpelier, those have all been geographically adjusted. And NCSL also relied on private and public sector compensation data provided by the Economic Research Institute for a baseline of city-specific salary statistics on a broad range of job titles. And in total, we used over 330 comparable jobs. We searched the market, for current salaries that other employers are paying for similar jobs with similar roles for each job title. And the central goal for the collection of these salary comps is to determine what is called the market rate for job titles within a given group or classification. And on the next slide, there's an example of market data that you can find in our appendix. So for the Director of Legislative IT, we use 7 market comps for this title. These market data, when averaged together, represent how other employers value similar jobs in the labor market. An average of all of the market data at the minimum, midpoint, and maximum provides a market range. NCSL next calculated a market-based salary range for each grade, 2 through 14 in the proposed General Assembly plan. This calculation was made by averaging the number of market minimums, midpoints, and maximums for all of the titles in a grade. The market data allows the General Assembly to determine the current market value for staff job titles and combines with the results of point factor analysis that Victor covered to provide a framework upon which a legislative-wide classification and compensation plan can be built.
Thanks, Selena. And to clarify, New Hampshire is one of the states. I want to make sure not New Jersey. So I want to make sure we have that clarification in there too. So I want to underline what Selena just said. So this example in figure 2, which is also found in the report, is just an example of one of the 61 titles that we created similar spreadsheets for. So we did this work. We looked at the market comps. We created an average, market average salary range for every title. And then we looked at where those different job titles in the Vermont General Assembly clustered together in our classifications or grades. So we came up with a market average salary range for each grade. And then we did math. Then we applied a mathematically logical and consistent formula. That's where that midpoint progression and range width, those definitions come in. Then we created a logical plan, which you can find in Appendix B. So the market average data that you're going to see for each salary title doesn't perfectly match our eventual proposed plan to you all. And that's because of the average and the basically the regression analysis we had to do to come up with the best fit for all of the titles in the plan aligned with the market data. So it's a little wonky, confusing, and dense, but hopefully we'll take questions if you have them, of course, at the end. So our recommendation, as was foreshadowed at the beginning, is that the General Assembly adopt the proposed unified classification and compensation plan presented to you in the report. And there's 3 main reasons why we think this is a good idea. First, it unites all of your job titles under one pay structure with ranges that reflect market values. Again, trying to help you be competitive, consistent, and transparent with pay in the legislature. It secondly provides a complete salary range for all job titles. It's not just a minimum where an employee isn't sure where they're going to go from there, or you as an organization don't have any kind of stop point on a range. It provides you with some parameters and guardrails. And third, it ensures a logical progression between job classifications. So you can point to something mathematically sound and consistent as you think about pay plan. Here on this slide shows you the data that's basically in Appendix B of the report, but gives you a little bit more of the analysis part that we did. And it's a little different from the handout we provided because we wanted to add columns around midpoint progression and range width. So the plan that we created for you has a consistent midpoint progression. It has a little bit of a jump between 2 ranges, again, to create that sort of best fit as far as the mathematically logical approach goes. And it has a graduated width. So it starts at 50%. Most organizations have range widths between 40 and 90%. We would consider that a best practice for this type of plan. The range widths are at 50% for the majority of the plan. There's a little bit of a jump at grade 10, and then it goes up to a broader range of 70% at the higher grades. And this can be really helpful for organizations where you might tend to find employees with more longevity, or the hope is that they might stay with the organization longer as they get to a higher grade in a plan. It gives them more of a runway when it comes to salary. Our report contains a few other recommendations should you adopt the plan that are related to recommendation 1. The first is to raise up any actual salaries in your legislature that lag the minimum into the range into which the title is placed. The third recommendation would be basically to make sure you don't use the same title in more than one place. I think that seems obvious maybe, because it could create some confusion. And there's really only one instance of that currently in the General Assembly. There's the same title is used in 2 offices, and our report kind of details where we think that title, what that title should be changed to and where it should be placed. Our fourth recommendation is more about moving forward, to use existing titles and range assignments whenever possible, in part because of all the hard work that the staff and NCSL did to assess the jobs, create those clusters, and find the market data. That is not to say you won't need to create new job titles down the line, but now you know a process you can use that is consistent with the rest of the plan that you have in place. And so really to think through your process, if you're going to create a new title, make sure you really need it. Lastly, we're just going to offer some general guidance for maintaining a pay structure moving forward. So this slide covers those topics that we'll very, very briefly touch upon. Selena, go for it.
Employee classification and compensation plans are prone to degrade over time, losing touch with the market rates and developing internal inconsistencies as jobs change. It's therefore critical to conduct routine market checks to ensure that pay rates remain competitive. So periodic market checks, we conducted a robust market salary research to establish the competitive pay rates for legislative employees. However, as the market for talent changes over time, and it is essential that the General Assembly monitor those changes, especially in key job titles and in work areas that experience high turnover. Best practices say that market checks should be conducted on benchmark positions every 3 years. Also, maintaining job descriptions is very important. Well-written and up-to-date job descriptions are one of the key elements that were involved in the point factoring and job evaluation. Keeping them simple is better. They do require maintenance as a position or job duties may change over time, and these should be periodically reviewed, similar to conducting market checks.
We touch on the issue of reclassification in the report. So you remember a classification or grade, there's those sort of clusters of jobs, and there's a number associated with them in the proposed plan that we gave to you. Reclass would be assessing whether a job title belongs in that grade still. Perhaps the job has changed so much so that it doesn't really fit in with the cluster of titles in which it's currently placed. Organizations would do well to create a process for considering changes to jobs like that. And we don't have there's no like magic answer for how it should be done, but our report gives you some guidance about how you could create a process and what factors you could consider as an organization. And then finally, we encourage the keeping in mind of the values that characterize the study project, which are uniformity, consistency, transparency, and collaboration. This project had a lot of collaboration from the staff, from the directors in particular, and with NCSL to try to dig in and understand the titles and the jobs that are supporting the General Assembly's really crucial, vital, important democratic work, democracy. We love that at NCSL, and so we really have a great interest in having staff structures that help the institution do its best work. And support of the Jlmc as the body that has oversight over staffing is critical too. We want to underline that and thank you for, again, being willing to engage in this work. It's dense sometimes, but it's really important. And we really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and to talk to you about our findings.
Thank you so much. This is Senator Ballin. I was not here at the very beginning and I apologize. I'm going to take over from the speaker who was pinch hitting for me. Thank you so much for that really thorough presentation. And before I open it up to questions, I just want to remind the committee that in just a few minutes, we're going to hear from our Director of HR, Arlene Donovan, about the possible approaches to implementing the structure in the broader compensation policy. So right now, I just want to keep our questions to questions we have to NCSL about methodology or the broad recommendations. So we just want to open it up. And I also have snacks here from the Pro Tem's office. So if anyone was not able to grab lunch, let us know, we'll pass them around. Any questions for this team at NCSL? I just have a comment. Sure, or comments.
So we've been working really hard to set a baseline to support our employees and create structure and transparency. And I just want to thank you for all your hard and great work in pulling this together. I had a chance to look through the report the other day, and it's just really helpful as we create and professionalize how we're supporting our employees here. So I just wanted to say thank you for this report. It's super helpful as we move forward in our work here at Jlmc.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is a question for these folks or if it's a question for Arlene, but reading through this, I see that we have now 61 staff titles. And And my question is, in this process, do we now have a fairly updated and detailed job description for each staff title? Was that a product of this?
Was that part of the work that NCSL did around job descriptions or simply job titles?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. We did not, our charge was not to create job descriptions. Rather, the HR team, Arlene and Eliza, led the staff in the General Assembly in creating up-to-date job descriptions. That is not easy work. That is not, it's time consuming. We know what that's like. So again, a big shout out of gratitude to the staff and to the HR team for having that in place, because as Selena referenced, it's really critical in helping like distill the key qualifications and expectations and duties and responsibility of a position. So I think Arlene probably is best poised to talk about what's happened, since our report took place. I should have said this between August. Our work was happening between August and February of 2022. So August 21, February 22. So anything that has changed since then, we couldn't speak to, but as far as we know, we've had job descriptions and for the titles we were looking at, and we were able to refer back to them often throughout the course of our work, which was very helpful in addition to those interviews that we conducted, which were confidential, but gave us some themes and gave us some things to think about and complemented the work that we did with the job descriptions review and also with the questionnaires that employees filled out. And those questionnaires ask questions about, again, help distill the essence of your job for us so we can understand it fully so we can make appropriate comparisons.
Senator Kitchell.
One thing I really found helpful, because I think we struggle with this, and that was looking at comparables, whether we're talking about the executive branch or the world around us. And sometimes we don't have a good sense of how that aligns. And so that part of your methodology in establishing the minimums, the maximums, and looking at sort of the relationship with the selected comparables, market comparables, I thought was particularly informative in the work that you've done.
So thank you so much. To keep us on track and make sure we're keeping things moving. Certainly if we need to get more questions or clarifications back from NCSL, we can do that. But at this point, I'm going to ask if Director of HR, is she zooming in or is she here? There we go. Come on up, Arlene. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So in just a minute, we'll have Arlene Donovan talk to us about implementation, possible structures, what that could look like in the short and the long term. And I just want to highlight for folks that the committee and others who might be listening today to our meeting, this pay structure, when combined with expert analysis about where individuals sit in the range of each grade, is just one piece of the puzzle of how we're going to be able to implement. So it's going to have to be weighed against the fiscal realities of the branch, our pay act practices and obligations, and the speaker and I, in consultation with the appropriations chairs and members of this committee, are going to be setting some fiscal guardrails going forward about the realm of what is possible for us at this moment in time. So just want to be clear that a lot of the nitty gritty steps that are going to happen with the guidance and counsel of the appropriations committees and this committee, and that we are going to be asking HR to help us in the implementation, but the decision-making rests here. So thank you, Arlene.
Thank you for having me. Arlene Donovan, HR Director. Good to see you all this afternoon. Let me start off. I do have a policy that I want to review with you in just a minute for your consideration. But before doing that, I think I'd just like to give you a brief update as to where we are now that the NCSL report is completed. We have contracted with a compensation analyst who is busy working away, reviewing everyone's job descriptions. So thank you for that question.
earlier about the job descriptions. We did work prior to the study kicking off with all of the directors and the staff to create the job descriptions. So that was one of the first things that we did. We needed them to be updated. We also sent out a request for the staff to update their resumes, because we also need that. NCSL didn't need that necessarily for their work, but we certainly need that now for this next step of the process and the compensation development, because we really need to see what everyone's skills and experiences, what their education looks like in comparison to those job descriptions. So we contracted with a compensation analyst who is doing that piece of the work. So she is reviewing all of the job descriptions. She is reviewing every individual's resume, and she will be putting all of that information up against and into the structure, should it be adopted, to try to identify where people actually fall within the structure, because that's the piece that is missing here. Because we really want to know if people are being paid appropriately, if they are overpaid, if they are adequately paid, and where they fall. The goal of the whole process really is to come as close as we can to paying people appropriately within the structure while still being fiscally responsible and keeping within reason there. So I appreciate the work that you all will be doing to help with that. So that is the short term. That work will be continuing. We'll figure out where everybody should be placed, ideally, and then we'll figure out where we can reasonably place people and what that looks like. For the long term, and by long term, I'm going to say for over the next year or so, we really do need to create a compensation philosophy here. So NCSL referenced it just very briefly, but a compensation philosophy will help us determine how we maintain this structure that we now have in place, because that will be really important. We don't want to lose sight of the maintenance of this structure. We want to keep everybody where they should be. We also want to figure out how other factors play into that, right? Like the Pay Act is one factor that we'll need to consider. Keeping the job descriptions updated clearly is another piece of this, and making sure that when people are hired that they have updated resumes, which we would normally do anyway, but to make sure that that piece is also maintained. And so we need to, as we go along, we need to figure out what our compensation philosophy might look like. Is there going to be a merit-based piece there? Currently, we are not paying based on a merit-based structure, and I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do. I'm just saying that that's an option that we may want to think about. The compensation analyst work, one thing I do want to point out to all of you is that that work is not merit-based. It is not being conducted based on anyone's performance or performance reviews. It truly is just looking at the market and based on people's skills and experience and education, where they might fall in that market range that NCSL has provided to us. So it's not about performance. Is there anything else that I can answer for you regarding that?
Just out of curiosity, did we receive any information back from NCSL about what other legislatures do around the issue of step increases versus merit increases?
Yes, yeah. So we've done that sort of on a preliminary basis, and I think as we get moving, we'll dig a little bit deeper into that. So thank you for the question. I think it is different in a lot of different places. We've talked, I in particular have spoken with NCSL about our structure and the Pay Act, and do we move the structure in accordance with the COLA? And that is one option that we could do, and there are a few other legislatures that do that. Some do pay based on merit, and some pay based on a factor of those two things. So I think it's just what makes most sense for us going forward based on what we've been doing historically.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Any other questions before we dive into the policy, which really is the first step of our future compensation philosophy? Okay. All right. So This policy is titled out of cycle wage adjustments, and it is really a policy that will impact adjustments that may be recommended for staff, for legislative staff, that fall outside of a typical annual pay process, like the Pay Act, for instance. So these types of adjustments are typically rare, but they would occur when somebody, for instance, is promoted and they may need a rate adjustment, or if they take on additional job responsibilities. So those are just a couple of examples. Maybe for pay equity is another reason. This particular policy applies to the chiefs of staff positions and the legislative employees, with the exception of the House and Senate staff, because those offices have other oversight jurisdictions. So House rules and Senate rules will determine and do determine their salaries. And so they will have a similar policy presented to those two bodies, but they are not covered under this particular policy that I'm discussing today. So I'm just going to go ahead and move down to the bottom of page 1 under out of cycle wage adjustment requests. So if a request is being made, it would come from a director and it would be brought to human resources. So it would be brought to me. And with that request, because it's an out of cycle adjustment request, it should come with a justification. So the director should create a justification for making the request or for the need for the increase. And if it's a change in job responsibilities or a promotion, a new job title, it should also come with an updated job description. So that's something that we would be looking for before having the conversation. If it's a director's adjustment, then that would still come to human resources, but I would be bringing that request to that particular director's oversight committee. So for the majority of us, that would be this committee, but for some of us, it's a different body. Just turning over to page 2. I've already talked about what these types of adjustments might be for. So I'm moving to the middle of page 2, which is the out of cycle wage adjustment approval. So the process would look something like this. The director would bring the request to human resources. We would have a conversation, look at the justification, and maybe a new job description. And then I would also consult with the chief fiscal officer, because we do want to make sure that everything is within budgetary confinements, and that we're thinking about the budgetary implications of any of these types of increases or adjustments. We would make sure that we were staying within the structure that was just recommended to us, and that the pay was equitable across the branch. And if we agreed, then human resources would go ahead and we would process that adjustment. If we did not agree, then we would jointly bring that request to the applicable oversight committee, so that that committee, in this case for the staff, it would be this committee here, and you all would hear both sides of that situation and make the decision. Moving down to the chiefs of staff positions. So the chief of staff positions, they would be determined and approved by either the speaker or the pro tem, all depending. And of course, the Office of Human Resources would certainly be available for any consultation that was needed. And then there are parameters in this policy that we would want to abide by. So again, we would want to make sure that we were staying within the structure. We don't want to go outside of the structure that was provided. We would be looking at these on a case by case or an individual basis, not as a group, but one by one. And we also added a confidentiality clause here, because we don't want to make promises to individuals before anything is approved. So we wouldn't want to be discussing dollar amounts or anything like that with staff until an approval has been handed down. And then the last piece under the processing, the adjustments, it just says that human resources would process the personal action request, the actual form to put these approvals into the DHR system. That's a very quick overview.
So we're not going to adopt and implement the out of wage cycle policy now. We wanted you to see it. And we have not a bunch, but we have some work that we need to do to make sure we understand fiscal guardrails. We really want to sit with the chairs of appropriations, talk more about implications of all of this. So we'll do more work on that between now and the next meeting. So we're not going to go to a vote on that, but I do want people to ask questions of Arlene on that piece. If you have them now, that will help us gather the information that we need for the next meeting. Senator Kitchell.
I don't know whether this, oftentimes when you're recruiting for a position and you're having a hard time, decisions are made called hiring into range. Would those be considered out of cycle wage adjustments? How would, so this would assume some of it seems to be internal, but if you're hiring new and trying to recruit, would that come under the same process?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think it would come under a very similar process. Currently, when we're recruiting, we would definitely want to stay within the range. So we did a fair amount of recruiting just back in the fall, as you all know. And we set up a pretty seamless process where the director and HR work together to come up with a starting salary. So this would be similar to that. We would just make sure that we were staying within the range that was presented to us by NCSL.
I would talk about into range, not outside the range.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully we stay within the range. Yeah.
Any other questions for, oh, yes, Representative.
This will tell you how much I don't understand about all of this, but is there an in-cycle wage adjustment? I mean, this is out of cycle, but I'm just trying to, this is.
Yeah, it's a good question, and part of it is sort of just the language that I use, but I'm really considering an in-cycle adjustment. It's a typical annual adjustment, which is a pay act that we see typically in July. So that's sort of the standard.
So this process would be responsive to an adoption of this.
It would.
Is that right? Those are the building blocks.
Exactly.
Thank you.
I'm being called to the clerk's office. My apologies.
Don't leave, Mazza, don't leave yet. Hold on, because the only thing the speaker and I were hopefully going to be able to complete here is asking for the committee to vote on the adoption of the recommendation of the structure from NCSL. And I'm wondering if people feel prepared to do that, or whether I'm looking at faces, I'm trying to read them. I don't know if people need more time before I we lost you for a minute there. Yes,
I have to
Representative
say,
Leclerc.
I feel comfortable with the overall concept. I
Yeah.
get it, I understand it.
Yeah.
I do think that we have an awful lot of work on our end to build upon that, but
Yeah.
overall, I think I'm comfortable with it. I think they did a very nice job.
Any other questions? Concerns? It's a good start.
Somewhere.
Followed up by all the work that we were talking about for the consultant.
You need a motion or?
I do need a motion.
I'll move.
In a second, the senator from Grand Isle has moved that we adopt the recommendations from NCSL. We have a second from Representative Ansel. So if there is are there any other further questions or conversations? So I'll call the roll. I will vote in the affirmative. Representative Leclerc,
Yes.
Representative Colson,
Yes.
Senator Kitchell,
Yes.
Senator Mazza.
Yes.
Senator Benning,
Yes.
Representative Ansel.
Yes.
And the speaker said that I should find her for the vote, but as the vote stands now, we are at 7 in support, 7-0-1 at this point. I expect she will vote in the affirmative, but thank you, Arlene.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And so we will be in touch with you about next meeting going forward. Thank you for all the work you've done. Thank you to all the heads of the departments who worked with you, and thank you to NCSL. Okay.
Thank you.